Welcome to this program brought to you by the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Library and Museum and by the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan. I'm Michael Van Denen. I am the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council, and on behalf of my colleagues Erica Kubik and Rachel Brooks and the Board of Directors of the Council, we express our gratitude for your interest in global engagement. Council's mission is to empower the people and organizations of West Michigan to engage thoughtfully with the world. And you can learn more about what we do at worldmichigan.org. We also thank our program partners, the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation and the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Studies at Grand Valley State University. This program, featuring Russian journalist Mikhail Zygar, author of the new book, War and Punishment, Putin, Zelensky, and the Path to Russia's Invasion of Ukraine. We will be led by our friend and global educator, Joel Westfall, the Deputy Director of the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Museum. Joel, we're grateful to you for your coordination of this program, and I turn to you to introduce our special guest and get things started.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, and I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. First of all, let me begin by first, a little housekeeping. After the questions that I'll be asking Mikhail, there will be a Q&A session afterwards. If you have any questions for Mikhail, please use what is called the Q&A feature, and you can submit your questions at any time during the beginning phase of the lecture. And now, let me introduce our esteemed lecturer today. Mikhail Zygar has accomplished quite a bit in his role as an international journalist. He has worked for Newsweek Russia and Business Daily Kommersant, covering the conflicts in places such as Palestine, Lebanon, Iraq, Serbia, and Kosovo, before becoming founding and editor-in-chief of Russia's only independent TV channel, Dozhd, which provided an alternative to Kremlin-controlled federal TV channels and gave a platform to opposition voices. He would win the International Press Freedom Award in 2014 by Time magazine. His first book publication, All the Kremlin's Men, became an instant number one bestseller in Russia, as well as other places, and has been translated into over 20 languages and was called one of the 9 books that can help you understand Russia right now. His previous book, The Empire Must Die, looks at the Russian Empire in its final days from 1900 to 1918 and provides an extraordinarily interesting journalistic account of the events rather than a more traditional historical one. Today, Mikhail is a weekly contributor to Der Spiegel and has most recently joined the City University of New York, SUNY, as a Press Freedom Fellow. Please help me welcome to the digital stage Mikhail Zygar to talk about his latest book, War and Punishment.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you for that introduction. That's my honor and pleasure to be part of that program, of that conversation. I'm looking forward to all of your questions.
Thank you. And we'll start off right away with the first one. First of all, Mikhail, I found your introduction very, very heartwarming. Can you relate what was your impetus for writing this book and why it is so important for Ukrainians to not see all Russians as the enemy?
You know, obviously, I decided to write this book right after the beginning of full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Although I've started thinking of it, and I've started collecting materials for this book earlier. Back in 2021, and that was the year when I traveled across the Ukraine, and that was the year when I first interviewed President Zelensky. But obviously, I reconsidered and I changed my approach after February 24th because I realized that I feel that I'm responsible for this war and I'm guilty for this war. I feel my personal responsibility as Russian author as Russian writer and journalist, and as representative of Russian culture. And I do think that we have been blind for so many years, if not to say centuries. We have overlooked all the dangers of the Russian imperial ideology. We turn blind eye to the pains of other peoples and other nations. We have argued against Ukrainians or Belarusians or other peoples occupied by Russian Empire, and we're not really careful about their version of history and their narrative, and we did not pay attention that our traditional historical narrative, the classical version of Russian history, has always been an imperial propaganda. Unfortunately, most of classical Russian historians have been working as propagandists, and they were working for the Russian state, And unfortunately, in most universities of this world, you would not find any history of Russian people, or to be more correct, of Russian peoples, because yes, we have overlooked the fact that Russia is a colonial empire and has always been a colonial empire. And I think it's right time to start this conversation. It's really needed. It's really needed to acknowledge that fact that the brutal war between Russian Empire and other peoples have started not in February 24th of last year, and not in 2014 when the occupation of Crimea started. It started many centuries ago, and we need to change our attitude just for the sake of future of the Russian people, of other peoples. So, and I do not consider this book to be a book about Ukraine, because I'm not a Ukrainian author. I'm not entitled to write the history of Ukraine. I'm entitled to write the new version of history of Russia, and I sometimes compare this book to the detective story written through the eyes of the murderer. Yeah, we have to watch that. We have to understand the terrible history of that empire.
Great, that's great. So your book looks back at Ukrainian, Russian history for the purposes of arguing that there actually is indeed a country of Ukraine, along with its own language and culture, as well as Russia's consistent attempts throughout the centuries to rebuff and or put down this belief. Can you briefly surmise the historiographical review, the viewpoint on this that you talk about in your book?
Yeah, sure. My idea is that actually we know quite a little about what was really happening, but our approach consists of historical myths, and I have 7 most important historical myths about Ukrainian history, or about history of Russian oppression of Ukraine, and all those myths are still alive. Lots of Russians believe in all those myths, including President Putin, and he is always using those myths, trying to justify his brutal aggression. The first of them is so-called reunification of Russia and Ukraine that happened in 17th century. So that's when that history began. Actually, Russia, Ukraine was. Probably it's fair to say occupied by Russians back in 17th century only. Initially, that was a contract signed by Ukrainian Cossacks and Russian Tsar, but both sides understood that contract very differently, because Russian Tsar has never signed any contracts with other peoples or with other organizations. Unlike Ukrainian Cossacks, which were very active, probably if they were living now, we might have called them private army, and they offered their service to different governments, including, for example, they fought during the 30 years war in alliance with France and Cardinal Mazarin. So they frequently sign contracts with other governments. That's why they signed an alliance with Russian Tsar. But he considered that that was some kind of pledge of loyalty, and that was the beginning of the troubled relationships between Moscow Crown and Cossacks. Another important myth is myth of so-called Ukrainian betrayal, the history of Russian Emperor Peter I and Ukrainian hetman Ivan Mazepa, who decided to break an alliance with the Russian emperor, and who decided to switch sides and to make a new alliance with Swedish emperor, because he felt that the policy of Russian Tsar was anti-Ukrainian. And that historical event is widely known as the betrayal of Hetman Mazepa, and even described in a very famous Russian poem by the greatest Russian poem, Alexander Pushkin. Poltava is one of the famous poems that is included in every Russian literature textbook in Russia, although it's a totally propagandist and anti-Ukrainian poem. After that, very important myth of Catherine the Great, who conquered Crimea and what is called Novorossiya, but also destroyed all the freedoms of Cossacks and brought serfdom to Ukraine. Or another very important myth about Ukrainian language, and now a lot of Russian propagandists and even Putin say that Ukrainian language does not exist. It's the same language as the Russian one, and that myth dates back to at least 19th century, when Russian Empire prevented any Ukrainian from reaching any prominent level in the government, or just Ukrainians could have been promoted. They could come to St. Petersburg, and there was a possibility for them to become ministers, generals, high aristocrats, but with one little precondition: they should have abandoned their national identity. They should have stopped speaking Ukrainian and speak only Russian. And probably many of you have heard about Nikolai Gogol, the great Russian writer, who is the very interesting, thrilling example of that national tragedy, because Nikolai Gogol was Ukrainian, his mother tongue was Ukrainian, but he, when coming to St. Petersburg, he realized that he could not reach any kind of popularity if he was writing in Ukrainian. So that's why he deliberately started writing all of his novels and tales in Russian. And so we have several more myths about Lenin and his role in creating Ukrainian statehood, definitely about Holodomor, genocide of Ukrainian people organized and pre-orchestrated by Stalin. Russian propagandists today usually say that nothing specific happened with Ukrainians. Yes, all peoples in Russia or in Kazakhstan or in Ukraine really suffered a lot during Stalin, but that's only the surface. If we would look carefully at Stalin's letters he was sending from from his summer residence in Sochi to Moscow, how he was ordering purges among Ukrainian intelligentsia, among the leaders of the Ukrainian Republic, we would clearly see that was a punishment for Ukrainian people, because they were revolting a lot against Stalin's policy, against Stalin's collectivization, and simultaneously, together with the great famine, with that great tragedy of Ukrainian people, there was another tragedy, so-called executed renaissance of Ukrainian culture. All the greatest poets and writers who were writing in Ukrainian were arrested, imprisoned, and then executed at the same time. And just to finish my list, the last and very popular among Russian propagandists myth is about Stepan Bandera, and
but you mentioned it. You talk about him a lot in the book.
Yes, and Ukrainian and collaboration between Ukrainians and Nazis.
Next question. I don't think many Americans, you mentioned this, of course, you mentioned this in your book, but I don't think many Americans know that during the Great Depression, many of our own corporations here went to the Soviet Union to help build factories for Stalin. My question to you is, was this history common knowledge in the Soviet Union, Russia? And is it your view that global U.S. corporations today should take a stance at what is currently going on in Russia and Ukraine?
That's a great idea, actually. I have never thought of that. No, actually, that's not a common knowledge. Stalin was not boasting with the fact that he was buying technologies from the United States. He preferred the myth that he has made it on his own, and that Russia did not rely on anyone's help. So most Russian history textbooks do not mention that fact. But I think it's really important to understand that if we're speaking about what's happening right now, to help Ukraine is really important, because it's not the matter of the future of this particular nation. It's very important for the security and democracy in Europe, and it's equally necessary for the future of Russia. But it's also very important because the values should matter. Ukraine is probably the first example for the many decades when we had a very clear aggression of one state against another, and showing support to Ukraine means that we should show that we still believe in values. And the fact that European governments, European people, American government, people in America, and probably companies in America support Ukraine, that's very important, because it's not about realpolitik, it's about the values.
Thank you, Mikhail. Next question, and this one is, I'll be honest, I was reading your book. I have to admit, I was really shocked at one particular point, since I don't know how many other authors or journalists, I've yet to see really any, have openly written about this. And what I'm referring to are your comments about the Moscow apartment bombings. Historically, is it your contention that the bombings were part of an FSB Maskirovka operation to gain popular support during the opening phase of the Second Chechen War?
That's a very sophisticated question, because most Russian independent journalists suspected that from the beginning. And during all those years, we all had the same conversations. We were telling each other, yeah, it's very suspicious, but it could not be true. Yes, we don't trust FSB, but they cannot be that bad. They are probably murderous, but not that bloodthirsty murderous. And that was the main direction of our conversations during all those years, probably till 2020, till the moment when the leader of Russian opposition, Alexei Navalny, was infamously poisoned, but happily could survive thanks to German doctors. And then, with help of other journalists, with help of Bellingcat and Christy Grozev, he managed to investigate his own murder attempt. And now we know quite a lot. We know that obviously FSB is killing people. We know that there is a huge department in Russian secret services in charge of murdering political opponents. That was such a eye-opening revelation that changed a lot for most of Russian journalists. Then we had the beginning of the brutal aggression, of full-scale aggression about Ukraine, and that changed our attitude to Russian regime, to Putin's regime even further. We could have never expected that such brutality was possible. So I guess that if we had doubts, because we could not believe that such brutality was possible, now we don't have all those doubts. And I would add one more detail. I also mentioned that in my book. You probably remember it. I was really shocked during the first month of the war when I've learned of three coincidental deaths of three prominent post-Soviet politicians, three personalities who made the greatest contribution for the collapse of Soviet Union. Three people who made Belavezha Accords died during 1 week. Former first president of Ukraine, Leonid Kravchuk, then former head of Belarusian parliament, Sviatoslav Shushkevich, and then the author of those accords, former Secretary of State of Russia, Gennady Burbulis. They all died almost simultaneously during the first month of the war. And that was a very tragic and very weird coincidence. But I will tell you more. I knew Gennady Burbulis very well, because during the last 5 years, I've been writing a book about the collapse of Soviet Union, and I've been interviewing him frequently. I met him at least 2 times a week. I knew that man very well, and he was in a great shape. He was in his 70s, but his physical shape was great. He was running marathons. So I do not believe that so everything can happen with elderly people, but I do not believe in such a coincidence when three most fierce enemies of Soviet Union die simultaneously during the war that in point of view of Vladimir Putin and FSB is a war that should symbolically restore Soviet Union.
It's another question, and I think a lot of Americans might not be familiar with this, but so in your book, you talk at great length. In fact, it's my favorite part of the book on how you kind of talk about Zelensky's transformation from comedy to acting to the presidency. For those in the United States, can you briefly explain the Caven system, which I think has absolutely no analogy in the United States? And my wife Tatiana described it to me as kind of a sarcasm on steroids, comedy team style routines, which team is the most sarcastic wins.
Yeah, it was really hard for me to try to explain that in the book, but I found it really important because I needed to show the evolution of Vladimir Zelensky as a person, and at the same time the evolution of the humor. What kind of humor was acceptable 20 years ago, and what about now? I would say that Caven, that's the name of the show, is some kind of a mixture of American college basketball league, Saturday Night Live, and The Voice. So imagine that there is a league, and every university in your country has a team, but they do not play basketball. They write sketches for Saturday Night Live, and once a month they come to the stage, and that's a TV show, and they show their sketches one after another, and there is some kind of jury like in The Voice, and those people are judging them, and the team that is more funny, more sarcastic, more entertaining wins and goes to another round. And that's like a huge league of several dozens of teams from all across the country. Not only in the beginning of 90s, it was not it was Russian TV show, but the teams that participated were from Ukraine, from Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Belarus, all the countries of former Soviet Union. So, and yes, Vladimir Zelensky was a star of that TV show. His team was a champion, and that was it was he even played for two teams, and it's very interesting that for example, it was his own personal choice to stop playing, to stop being a Russian superstar, and to return from Moscow to Kiev. He used to live in Moscow till 2003, 2004, till the moment, several years while he was playing in that TV show, and he was very well known in every Russian household. But then it was his moral choice. It was not because of any political issues. He didn't care. He didn't care about politics that time. He just wanted to come back to Kiev and to work for his people, for Ukrainian television, and that was the choice. And it's very symbolic that his decisions have some right with the political development of Ukraine. So he came approximately the same time as Orange Revolution happened in Ukraine, and that's so. I think his life is a very symbolic. He is a very typical representative of his generation, and it's very important to mention that he is the representative of the first post-Soviet generations of Ukrainian politicians. Because if we have a look at Ukrainian presidents, the two first presidents were Soviet generation. They used to be members of Communist Party. Even more, they were high-ranking members of Communist Party. Then there were several presidents who used to be members of Komsomol, Youth Communist League, and they were also prominent members of that communist organization. And Zelensky is the first person who didn't spend most of his life in Soviet Union, who was young enough to be a member of Komsomol. So most of his life was after the collapse of Soviet Union. So he doesn't share that colonial
culture shift.
Colonial background, Soviet background, and that's very important because he's not the only one. He's the representative of his society.
Yeah, I found you're talking about the Caven system and how he used that to kind of improve his notoriety, the fact that it made him famous. It made him famous. It was a system that you could become famous if you were on a member of one of the best teams in Soviet Union, and he was on one of these teams.
Yeah, absolutely, and he used that to become a stand-up comedian and an actor and a producer. And he produced several very successful comedies, and he has become one of the best-known movie stars in
Yep.
all former Soviet Union.
So let's move to talk about Vladimir Putin. While there is a lot in the book that speaks to the mindset of what led Putin down the path to war, I was very taken in by your using Viktor Pinchuk's comments following the diplomatic turnabout, which led to the Orange Revolution. You quote him saying, "At first, I didn't think that the pro-European discourse, i.e. the idea of Ukraine's promotion to the European Union, could have caused such bitterness in Moscow. Only later did I realize that modern Russia does not accept the very philosophy of win-win at all. The principle of who is not with us is against us is a strategy of the entire Putin rule. For him, many pro-Western actions are synonymous with anti-Russian ones. The message is simple. You cannot decide anything without us. Russia does not need equal partners. It needs satellites and vassals." What is your view on this?
Yeah, it's very interesting, but I would say that it's a bit more complicated because it's first, it's deeply rooted into Russian and Soviet history, and yes, a lot of people of all the generations, people of Putin's generation, do believe that there is no difference between Russians and Ukrainians. They don't know the context, they don't know history, so they're quite sincere about that. But what has happened with Putin is much worse because he has become very paranoid. And I'll tell you a brief story how that happened. As a person, he was influenced by his experience of working in KGB, as well as an experience of being vice mayor of St. Petersburg in 90s, who was in charge of foreign trade, which means who was in charge of working with mafia and helping mafia smuggling anything to St. Petersburg. So actually, he was very close to the gangsters of St. Petersburg in 90s. That shaped his personality and that shaped his psychology. He's a very suspicious person. But at the same time, what the most important turning point in his approach to Ukraine probably happened in 2004, right during the Orange Revolution that we mentioned. There was a presidential campaign in Ukraine, and the Democratic candidate Viktor Yushchenko was opposed by pro-Kremlin candidate Viktor Yanukovych, the candidate backed by President Putin. And Putin was so active during that presidential campaign. He was campaigning himself. He was coming to Kiev. He was speaking to the media. He was touring in Ukraine. So he acted as that was his own election. And then he spent a lot of money on Russian spin doctors who were sent to Ukraine to help to run that campaign. And I remember perfectly well the moment that was in the beginning of November 2004. That was the day when the presidential election happened in the United States. George W. Bush against John Kerry. And there was a reception in the residence of American ambassador in Moscow. and I was there. And all Russian political scientists, all prominent Russian political scientists, including almost all of them, had to be in Kiev that day because they were working for Ukrainian presidential election at that very time. But there was a little holiday break for them between the first round and the runoff. And one of very well-known Russian political scientists, was holding whiskey in his hand, and he was laughing and ironically saying, "What can we say about American democracy? They've got the election day is today, and we still don't know who is going to be the winner. In our elections," he meant Ukrainian, "the situation is much better. The runoff is only in a week, but we already know that our candidate is going to win. That will be Viktor Yanukovych." They were 100% sure that their candidate is going to win, and that was what they were reporting to Putin. Putin was 100% sure that his candidate was winning, but everything went wrong. Ukrainians started protesting. There was a huge protest rally, never-ending protest rally on the main square of Kiev, Maidan. And as a result of that public outrage against electoral fraud, Democratic candidate Viktor Yushchenko was proclaimed a winner. And all those technologists, all those spin doctors could not report to Putin that they failed, that they were just incompetent. They have stolen all the money allocated to that electoral campaign. They were completely ineffective and were lying to him all the time. So they had to invent a theory. They reported that they did everything right, but Americans did more, and Americans paid much more. And American spin doctors were more active, and they had more money, more resources. And actually, it was not about their incompetence. It was George W. Bush who was supporting pro-American candidate Yushchenko. And that was the reason why Putin and his team failed during that election. And that was the turning point. That was the beginning of Putin's paranoia. He really started believing that that Bush had that theory, and even more, in 2 months, when there was President Bush's inauguration, his speech was very ambitious. He was it was called Bush's doctrine. He was speaking about spreading democracy all over the world. He was promising to come to all those authoritarian regimes and to bring them democracy, as it has already been done in Afghanistan, Iraq, Georgia, and Ukraine. And Putin took that as a threat. Putin considered that as a direct threat to his personal power. He thought that that he's going to be the next target. So that he was really afraid by that, and that was the reason why he never treated Ukraine separately. He treated Ukraine, everything what was happening in Ukraine, as a danger to himself. He considered all the political process in Ukraine as a rehearsal of the revolution in Russia.
So great transition. Just really quickly, you do cover this quite a bit in your book, and quite extensively. You were there during the Orange Revolution in person on the Maidan. What was it like for you to experience that as a journalist, and as well as someone who was just in the crowd?
I had quite a long experience as a war correspondent. I worked in lots of different places in Iraq, in Sudan, in Lebanon. I was I had to cover a lot of different revolutions in different countries, and a lot of terrible things, a lot of massacres. I had to investigate political murders. So being in Kiev in 2004 was probably one of the happiest assignments I had in my life, because the victory of Orange Revolution was a total happiness. That meant that everything is not in vain, that actually values matter, that people matter, that the corrupted officials can win, and they can threaten, they can put pressure, but their capacity is limited. So, and there is one moment when enough is enough, and democracy can win. And definitely, all of us, all of Russian citizens, all of Russian journalists were thinking in the same way. We were thinking that we should be the next. That we started dreaming of some kind of the revolution happening in Russia, and in 8 years, when I was working as editor-in-chief of Russia's only independent news TV channel, and the protest rallies started in Russia, and we were the first TV channel to start covering them, and we helped all those protest rallies to happen, because our audience watched that the protest rallies were possible, and they were not suppressed by the police, and they are so massive that the authorities just don't know how to suppress them and what to do with them. They have to tolerate them, and then every next protest rally was bigger and bigger. I had the same feeling all during those months. I had the same feeling. I was 100% sure that we were prevailing. I was sure that Putin's dictatorship was doomed, and he had to go within months or at least years. But actually, I was naive to make that conclusion.
Well, you also discuss many of the very popular Soviet dissidents in your book: Solzhenitsyn, Brodsky, Sakharov, Vasil Stus. Is there a comparison to the dissidents of the Soviet Union of the 60s, 70s, and 80s to today's dissidents like Maria Alekhina, Kasparov, Navalny? What do they face in comparison to what those in the Soviet Union faced?
I think there is a very important difference, because dissidents of the Soviet Union, they had no hope. They had no hope at all. They knew that their ultimate goal was to sacrifice. So they could not dream of struggling for power. They were not politicians. They knew that they had to die, and probably it would be an inspiration for someone. That might be a difference between all those heroic people and the dissidents who were active in Russia during the last decade, because still in Russia there was hope, and Alexei Navalny was a great example of that. He would start arguing if he had heard your question, because definitely he doesn't consider himself to be a dissident. He considers himself to be a politician, and he has always tried to portray himself as one, and as the person who wants to become the president of Russia, and who wants to change the country. And till recently, it changed for a lot of people. The beginning of full-scale aggression against Ukraine made a lot of people forget about our dreams. It was a turning point for many people, and a lot of people stopped believing that a bright, decent, democratic future for Russia is possible. And yes, I think that a lot of current dissidents who live abroad, who live in exile, are as desperate as the previous generation of Russian dissidents. Not all of them. I know that even in Russia and even in exile, there are still naive or idealistic or very determined people who are still trying and who still believe that it's still that the political change is still possible. And at the same time, I think that yes, we are in a different position because Russian society that time and Russian society today are very different. We have very important technological advance. We've got internet. We've got a lot of information coming from Russia, and we have possibility to deliver our message. We know that YouTube is not blocked. We know that all the media in exile are working. We know that the most important media working from the exile, I would say three most important media, Dost, Medusa, and FBK, the foundation of Alexei Navalny, they are needed, they are watched inside Russia, and they are extremely popular. So we are in a more privileged position than our predecessors.
I have a couple more questions left, and I promise we'll get to the Q&A in a little bit. We might go a little longer than an hour today, but I think that's okay. I think we're all having a really good time, and the answers
I promise
absolutely
to be
fantastic.
Very brief with my answers.
Don't worry
I'm
about
sorry.
it. Don't worry about it. Not at all. This has been very illuminating, and I know the audience is extremely excited about hearing more of what you have to say. I have one more question that I have written, and then one that I've actually received from a bunch of folks. So my last one is the following. You write the following. In the Soviet Union, there are two faces. Actually, this is a quote. You're quoting someone. In the Soviet Union, there are two faces, one official, one underground. There is the Communist Party, propaganda, mass holidays celebrated by citizens who pretend to believe in communism and a brighter future, while in reality, they chase after scarce items of food or imported clothes and dream of, and in quote here, living like in the West. What do Russians dream of now?
No, it's very sad question, because yes, Russia has become 100% capitalist country. Russia has become probably one of the most capitalist countries in the world, and now Russians have all of the mentioned above. The previous 2 decades were probably the most prosperous decades in Russia ever. So Russians have it all. Russians, in Russia, there is the new bourgeoisie that exists now in Russia. And the fact that a lot of people have a lot to lose, and they don't want to lose their apartments, their comfortable life, their cars, their jobs, their possibility to travel abroad. That makes them very passive. You know that 100 years ago, even more, Lenin used to say that the working class has nothing to lose except for their chains, and that's why the revolution was inevitable. Now, any kind of uprising against Putin is inevitable because everyone has a lot to lose. People know what's at stake. They know that they have just tasted that flavor of rich life. A lot of people. I'm not speaking about the elite in Moscow. I'm speaking about the middle class in Moscow and a lot of Russia's big cities. Uh, a lot of people are satisfied with their lives, and that makes them very cautious. That doesn't mean that they support everything Putin does. They doesn't mean that they support the war, but they just value their comfort, and that's the main difference between Russians today and the Soviet Union. I'll tell you more. There is one very important difference between Soviet economy and Russian economy right now. Soviet Union was suffocated without Western technologies. Soviet Union didn't have computers, didn't have microchips. Soviet technology could not be developed at all. It was very backward. And unfortunately, the situation right now is quite different because Russia is not isolated by the rest of the world. It's isolated from the West, but it has China to supply it with its microchips and technologies. It has China and India to buy oil and gas. And unfortunately, even more, I guess that there was a huge mistake made by the West right in the beginning of this full-scale aggression, when a lot of people, a lot of Russian businessmen, a lot of representatives of Russian middle class were so shocked, were so terrified by the beginning of this war, of this aggression against Ukraine. They were so emotional and really determined to leave the country, to start fighting against this war, to start supporting Ukraine, to do anything they could, because they were shocked, and they were sure that their future they were dreaming of is not possible anymore. They were sure that the whole future was destroyed by Putin. But their intention to leave Russia, to go to work in the West, in Europe, or in any other places, was stopped because European Western banks did not welcome holders of Russian passports. Anyone who had Russian passport found their accounts frozen or blocked. Even I, who came as a political refugee from Russia after the beginning of the full-scale aggression, and I opened my bank account in Germany in the beginning of March, and in 2 weeks it was shut down because of my Russian passport. Okay, I'm a journalist. I don't care about money. I don't have money. I didn't have any business I should take care of. I should take care of my family only. But if I was a businessman, and I know a lot of businessmen, I'm not speaking about all so-called oligarchs affiliated with Putin. I'm speaking about middle-level business. They found that they cannot do anything. They didn't have any other choice but to come back to Russia, because Russia was the only possibility where they could have any money, where they could have any business. They were afraid that Putin was about to start purges against his political enemies, but all those purges didn't happen. He started repressions against those who spoke out against the war actively, but the rest of the business was welcome. And what we have an investment boom in Russia from Russian oligarchs who had to return their assets and their money from the West. We have the investment boom from Russian businessmen who used to withdraw their incomes and keep them in Western banks, or who used to send their kids to study in Europe, or who used to travel in Europe or to America. Now they cannot have that possibility because they have to keep their money in Russia. They have to spend them in Russia. They have to invest in Russia. Late last year, International Monetary Fund reported that Russian GDP was minus 2.1 last year, and the forecast for this year was minus 2.3. Then in January it changed its estimate, and in January IMF predicted that the growth of Russian economy would be 0.3. Then in April, they changed it for 0.7. In June, they changed it for 1.5. In October, they changed it for 2.1 or 2.3. So now we have growth.
Yeah.
We have growth in Russia. And that's a huge present to President Putin. No one was expecting last year, because everyone was really sure that Russian economy was going to collapse. I'm sorry for such a long answer.
No, not at all. So this question here, I have been asked to ask this from quite a few patrons and friends, and that is I have to ask. I have had many requests. Has the start of the war in Ukraine affected the state of the LGBTQ plus community in Russia today? Is it the same or is it worse?
I know quite a lot about the LGBT community because I'm a representative of it, and I married my longtime partner last October. When we left Russia, we did it in Portugal, because that was absolutely impossible while we lived in Russia, as it's outlawed in Russia. It's not legal. And that was the moment when I had a possibility to check the real level of homophobia in Russia, because we made it public. We posted the news about our wedding in our social media, and it has become a very important news on all Russian propagandist TV channels. All the worst propagandist TV shows were discussing our marriage for a week at least. We were called Satanists by Dmitry Kiselov, the worst Putin's propagandist. We were cursed by Nikita Mikhalkov, the infamous filmmaker, once Oscar-winning filmmaker, but now he's completely crazy. And so we were expecting that we had to be cursed by the population of Russia, because actually it was some kind of the first public same-sex marriage of public people, of well-known people. But what we had in reality was quite the contrary. We were expecting a wave of hatred, but we received tens of thousands of personal messages on our social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, and 99% were warmest wishes, were people thanking us for being brave and for being an inspiration. People were really nice. They were really sincere. We received a lot of messages from representatives of LGBTQ community, as well as from straight men and women. It was and it was the moment when I realized that the stereotype of the homophobic Russia is exaggerated, because we have very homophobic political establishment. We have very homophobic Soviet generation of those people who surround Putin, and they're trying to play with it. They're trying to exaggerate this. They were sometimes they are making that for not even for domestic consumption, but for the international consumption. For example, this year, unexpectedly, Russian Parliament voted for the new law that outlawed transgender people, and that was really surprising act because no one cares, unfortunately, in Russia about transgender people. That's not something that is widely discussed. That's not in an everyday agenda. If it's in any kind of agenda, but it's here in America. America is the only place where I hear the slogan "Trans Lives Matter." So when Russian Parliament voted for that law, that was only a message sent to America. That was a message sent to American far right to show that, look, there are some traditional values kept in this country. We are your potential allies. It's a hypocrisy. It's Putin's political hypocrisy, but that's how he that's how he plays. That's the impression he wants to produce.
Very interesting. Okay, now to the questions. I've got only have a couple of them. Thank you for those who put the questions in. The first one comes from Jennifer. She writes, I am currently living in Slovenia and have found some people who see the war as more of an American aggression or not even a war, or that Russia is not the only party at fault. She's asking for any suggestions on talking points to counter them. These are my family and coworkers, so I need to be diplomatic. Great question. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, it's really complicated because that's the turn of Russian propaganda. In the beginning, Putin claimed that there are Nazis in Ukraine, and that's why Ukraine needs to be denazified. But that message did not work apparently for the Russian audience, so they had to adjust it from the beginning. So they changed the message, and as Russian army was defeated from the beginning of the war in March and April next to Kiev, they changed the enemy. They stopped saying that they were fighting against Ukrainians. They started saying that they are fighting against Americans. That's actually the existential war between Russians and the West and NATO, and that's only a proxy war. And Ukrainians are used as puppets by Americans. That's the narrative RT Putin, Russian propaganda are spreading. It's really ridiculous. As actually ridiculous is the message that NATO is to blame. That's another part of that narrative. That the real reason for this war. So the war can be justified, they say, because of NATO enlargement. NATO should have never been enlarged, and in this way, Putin would be very calm and peaceful and would have never started the war. No one really cares about NATO. No one really suspected. Putin didn't suspect that NATO can invade Russia. That's nonsense. Even more, back in the year 2000, when Putin was just elected as president, he had an idea that Russia could join NATO. So he was never afraid of the real aggression against Russia. He was never afraid of Americans invading Russia. The only thing he's afraid of losing his power. So this war is actually is a possibility for him to stay in power forever. So he needs this war because that's the only mechanism that keeps him in power. And unfortunately, that's why he doesn't need any negotiations. He doesn't need any truce or any ceasefire because he needs this war.
Putin has a list of foreign agents who are considered to be enemies of the state. Are you on this list?
Absolutely, sure, yeah. A proud member of this list, and I'll tell you more. Actually, when it was just when this law was just introduced, it looked a bit scary and very insulting. And the first foreign agents were really confused and didn't know what to do. But during the last years, that's like badge of honor. We when I was labeled as a foreign agent, it was better than a birthday. I was receiving congratulations from everyone, from people I know and don't know. Even more, as my books are still being sold in Russia, in not in all the bookstores, but in some bookstores. When I was labeled as foreign agent, the bookstores had to add stickers on each book, and usually it was written, "This is a very dangerous book. You should not buy it because it's written by the foreign agent." You may imagine that the sales skyrocketed, and it was very profitable decision for me. Yeah.
Next question comes from Lee. I think it's a good one. Was Georgia and Armenia, were they a precursor to the the Russian invasion of the Ukraine? Were they kind of a practice?
Excuse me, I'm not sure that. Could you repeat it?
Yeah, he's asking he's asking whether the whether Georgia and the Armenia, those events, were they precursors to the Ukrainian invasion? Were they practice for the Ukrainian invasion? I'm assuming he's meaning Georgia in the early 2000s, of course, prior to the 2014 and the Little Green Men. There was the issue with Georgia. I'm not sure what he means by Armenia. Armenia is kind of going on now. I don't recall an earlier Armenian operation.
Probably it could be it could be two recent wars between Armenia and Azerbaijan in Nagorno-Karabakh. Yeah. I think it's a bit more complicated, and as I do not remember, I do not believe that there is a predetermination. I do not believe that Putin had the strategy to do what he did from the beginning. I always say that Putin is not a strategic player. He's not a chess player. I always compare him with a surfer. He's a brilliant tactical player. He's so effective because he's very quick in changing his decisions. He's not. He doesn't have parliament to consult with. He doesn't have oppositional parties. He doesn't care about the public opinion, so he can make any decision very quick. And he prefers not to take any decision till the last moment. He usually thinks that the time is on his side, and he can wait. And unfortunately, that's the moment. That's what is happening right now. He does believe that the time is on his side right now. He doesn't feel that he is humiliated in Ukraine. He feels that he's not running out of money and out of soldiers, because he's paying a lot to the new soldiers, to the people who live in the most poor and depressive regions of Russia. So he can wait for Western support to Ukraine to fade away. That's his tactics, not strategy. I know that he started preparing for this war, for this exactly that kind of full-scale aggression in the beginning of 2021. I don't think that there was a clear strategy before that. There were different scenarios, but I'm sure that he didn't take that decision till in a year before the aggression. I might say that the recent war that happened between the recent military operation that was organized by Azerbaijan in Nagorno-Karabakh was a clear political consequence of Russian aggression against Ukraine, because really no one paid attention that the whole Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh had to flee from the territory they used to live for like all of their life. It was a huge humanitarian catastrophe, and it was completely unnoticed by anyone in this world. So in that way, it was connected, but I don't think that they were discussing it. They were conspiring against it.
Well, I'd like to thank some of the questions I can. Unfortunately, I can't get to really anymore. I just wanted to ask one last one. Mikhail, what's next for you? What's the next book?
No, I have two projects I'm working on simultaneously. I've mentioned that I've started writing a book about the collapse of Soviet Union many years ago, and it's very different from everything you have read about collapse of Soviet Union or you have heard, because I want to write a book that would be not focused on Gorbachev and Yeltsin, that would be not focused on Moscow. I've spent a lot of time traveling to former Soviet republics, interviewed former first presidents or first secretaries of the Communist Party or independence movements leaders. So it would be a very diverse picture from different angles, from the viewpoints from Kiev and Tbilisi and Vilnius and Almaty and Yerevan. And I think it would be very important right now, because what we see right now is the bloody collapse of Soviet Union. We used to think that Soviet Union collapsed peacefully in 1991. You used to thank President Gorbachev for letting it go in such peaceful manner. Unfortunately, it didn't happen that way. And what we have right now is the bloody collapse of Russian Soviet Empire. I hope it's the final collapse of that empire. But another project that is inspired by my book War and Punishment, and I know that now it has to become my new mission, and I just even if I didn't want it, I had to do that. I have to write something like a new history textbook. I have to create another non-imperial narrative of Russian history, not Moscow-centered people's history of Russia. I have to give back voices to all other ethnicities, local tribes, peoples that were colonized by Russia during the last centuries, and we have to include them into that history as well. I think it's going to be very important for the future generations of Russia. As well, it's going to be very important for any people involved in Russian studies, in Russian history, or who study Russian culture.
Well, Mikhail, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you doing this. Michael, take it away. It's all yours.
Thank you, Joe. Mikhail, Uh, Thank you so much for this. Is there can people follow you on social media? How can they stay up with you and the things you're doing from day to day, week to week?
Absolutely. My what used to be called Twitter and now it's called X is Zigaro. It's like my surname with letter O in the end. That's a mixture of Figaro and my surname. For example, yeah, or if you have any ideas, you can always write me on email. It's also very easy. Mikhail, like my name, then dot, then Zygar as my surname, and at gmail.com.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thanks. I'm sure after this
Thank you.
conversation, you will find yourself being followed by a
Thank you
few.
so much.
Okay, right.
I was
And thank
really
you.
honored today to be part of this.
Oh, fantastic. Right. And thanks you, Joel, for being part and leading the discussion. Great conversation. We have learned much this evening, and we have a lot more to think about. So join us again for a future program, the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan. Go to worldmichigan.org and the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Museum. Please pay Joel and his colleagues a visit. They've got a great exhibition right now called A Heartbeat Away, the American Vice Presidency. And we appreciate you being with us tonight. Good evening.